Today we'll be joined by Nick Marriner, Ethan Workman and Enya O'Reilly, who will be talking about the Tracking the Impact project. The Tracking the Impact project is a landscape wildlife surveying programme which has been running across the central Chilterns since 2020. It focuses on using national structured scheme protocols for birds, butterflies and plants at a more localised scale. This talk will be part of the TEPoP Festival, which includes a range of other events for which links will be posted in the chat during this talk. So without any further delay, I'll hand over to today's speakers.
Thank you very much, Sophie. As said, this is the first of the 2024 UK TEPoP Festival events, and we're really happy to be collaborating with the JNCC Science Talk series again. UK TEPoP is the UK Terrestrial Evidence Partnership of Partnerships. It was created to bring together JNCC's partners working in the field of terrestrial biodiversity surveillance and monitoring to collaborate and enhance joint working. Since TEPoP was founded 8 years ago, we've expanded the official TEPoP network to welcome several other organisations that were keen to collaborate into our discussions, and we're happy to see lots of representatives from the TEPoP organisations and JNCC here today. As you can see from this slide, this is a very complex network which brings together a wide range of organisations. We have 5 events planned for this year's TEPoP Festival. These are a mixture of webinars and workshops. These are on the slide, but I'll be sharing them in the chat in a second as well, with the relevant sign-up links. Many of these events will be recorded and added to YouTube if you want to catch up on any you miss, and we'll also be writing up the discussions from workshops into written reports for you to read. The next event on Thursday is a workshop on designing personal feedback for volunteers. We'd love to hear from anyone who works at the interface of biodiversity data and people. The spaces for this are limited, but there are a few left. So if you're keen to get involved, I'll be putting those registration links in the chat. So yeah, sign up through that. We also have a new TEPoP email, which I'll also put in the chat as well, if you'd like to get in touch with us. We're very happy to welcome Nick Marriner from the Chilterns National Landscape, who coordinates the Tracking the Impact project that we will be talking about today. He'll give us an overview of the project, and Enya O'Reilly from JNCC will be taking us through some of the outputs that JNCC are working on using the data collected by TTI. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to Nick to start the presentation.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Ethan. Much appreciated. I'm assuming I'm taking control, but who knows? We'll see how we go with the slides, but we'll see where we go. So, thanks very much for the invitation. Really pleased to be, for some of you on the call, probably bore you to tears again with another presentation on Tracking the Impact. But for those of you who've not heard it before, hopefully there's a little bit of information, a bit of interest in what we think is a project that's getting some kind of traction on a local scale on the ground. So I guess landscape scale monitoring is the theme of the day and the background to our work, which I'll hopefully bring to life as we go through the slides. So my role, I work for the Chilterns Conservation Board, what was the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, now rebranded to the Chilterns National Landscape. And we're just coming to the end of a 5-year National Lottery Landscape Partnership Scheme, so funded by Lottery and various other partners. So the work I'm going to talk about today it fits in that context, but really I guess fits alongside, and I guess a key message I won't go into too much detail here, but we are essentially, our overall brief in the Landscape Partnership Scheme is to look at landscape scale conservation. So our project area is about 1/3 of the Chilterns. So we're in that kind of space, hopefully landscape scale wise, where we're big enough to make a difference, but small enough to keep it local and keep it real. So on one hand, my role is to look at practical conservation projects, habitat creation, habitat management projects, mostly through a new farmer cluster network that we've set up in the area. And we've done a whole range of different things from hedgerow planting on a scale, so 30 kilometres of hedges that we've planted or coppiced. We've done a whole range of chalk grassland restoration projects. We've helped farmers support 20 new agri-environment scheme agreements to come in. So I guess the whole kind of point on one side of the role, a lot of work on the ground on a scale to look at providing more better, bigger, better connected habitats on the ground. And the slide here really, I guess, is our longer term approach to that piece of work about working with our farmers and building baselines to then look at the numbers of hectares of work that we've been able to deliver on the ground. And then the longer term, then we should start to then be able to see and be able to track the change in terms of species recovery and habitat improvements across the patch. So when we were designing the project, on one hand, the work with the farmers we can work through, and we spend a lot of time engaging with them to look at what they want to do on their farms to help join up and create more habitats on the ground. The big question, and I guess the genesis for the Tracking the Impact project, came when we're starting to look to the bottom right of that of the model I've put on the slide there, about actually asking the question, how do we know, how will we know, and when we will know that actually the aggregation of all that work netted off against all of the negative development impacts in the patch, etc. When we know actually, are we making a difference for nature recovery in terms of species trends in our patch? So naively, 7 years ago, I set about asking various questions, thinking I could press a button and all the national schemes would give me that answer in the Chilterns. And from various kind of reasons, as you all know better than I do, you're much more experienced as an audience here about actually the design of these kind of schemes. A lot of the national schemes are designed to work on a national level. They fall down. They don't have the the scale and the coverage when you get to a local level on the ground to be able to tell us what's happening. So essentially, we cut a long story short, we sat down with various partners, many of you whom are you in the room today, or if not, your colleagues, and thank you for your time and effort over the last few years to get Tracking the Impact off the ground. But we essentially sat down and we planted that question with the organisations you can see on the slide here, and say, well, how do we best go about tracking change, tracking the impact, if you like, of all this kind of work on the ground, so we in the Chilterns know what's happening to our birds, to our plants, to our butterflies, to our wildlife, so we can make intelligent decisions and support and engage and excite our farmers and make good use of the resources we have, and not rely on the fact that national trends are happening in the same way in the Chilterns as they might be happening in Cumbria and Cornwall across the piece. So long story short, lots of conversations across those partner organisations. They essentially led to Tracking the Impact design. So essentially what they came and set out and said, if you use national recording schemes, so in this case, Breeding Bird Survey, the National Plant Monitoring Scheme and the Wider Countryside Butterfly Survey, you not only get a robust, proven, tested, tried survey methodology, but you also get a lot of back-end support in terms of data entry and data analysis. You get a whole load of training resources, etc. So essentially they said, if you use birds, butterflies and plants, they're a good proxy for change in landscape. They're typical of the Chilterns arable farmed landscape that we're working in. If you use the national recording schemes, you get a proven methodology. You don't need to reinvent the wheel and whole kinds of range of different things. And if you replicate the national recording schemes in your local landscape, that will give you the good basis over time of being able to track change, and really importantly, compare that to national, local, regional trends that are coming out from the national surveys as well. So in essence, that's what we've done on the ground over the last 5 years, and that's been the basis for Tracking the Impact, of where we've got to now after 5 years, and where I hope we'll still be in 10 years' time, talking to yourselves about the results, and hopefully 15 years' time and 20 years' time, when we really will have this real rich data set about what's happening in the Chilterns itself. So in essence, the project, so if you can see the map there, I guess it's kind of the purple line is the boundary of the Chilterns National Landscape. So we stretch down from the Thames in the southwest, and then we kind of head, as we're going northeast, we head over the M40, we skip past Wickham, and then we end up, as you go further northeast, we end up towards just north of Luton. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the whole of the national landscape. And our project area is in the central wedge, if you like. So the pink squares and the blue squares are the now 72 squares that form part of our representative sample for the survey. So in essence, our colleagues at the local record centre had the brief of saying, well, how many squares do we need across our patch to make the survey representative? And there's a figure banded around about 20-25%, which to us equates to 72 squares that will give us the representative sample of our project area. In the same way that the national recording schemes have their representative sample of 2,000-3,000 squares, ours is around about 72. So in essence, the project brief at the beginning was to recruit volunteers, train volunteers, deploy, support, manage, lead, engage and excite volunteers to carry out breeding bird survey, wider countryside butterfly survey, and the national plant monitoring surveys in each of these 72 squares. That would be, and over time we build the data set, and we can start to look at trends for birds, butterflies and plants. And kind of heads up to Enya's session in a minute, we can start to look at co-location. So we can look at surveys that are carried out in the same square. Are there any differences in what's happening to our birds, to our butterflies, to our plants? It gives us the ability in the data set at least to look at comparing across taxa as well as across the area. So that was the brief 5 years ago. And we said, well, basically, how hard can that be? Let's set out and try and recruit volunteers and set the whole project up from there. So in essence, with the brilliant support of UKCH, of Plant Life, of BTO and of Butterfly Conservation, I essentially act as a kind of quasi-regional organiser for the 3 surveys. So in the same way for BTO or for the national schemes, local people on the ground will coordinate, allocate squares, they will chase people for data, they'll verify records, they'll look at survey routes and mapping survey routes. Essentially, that's a big part of my job. With the team of volunteers that we're now recruiting, to get them set up, to get them allocated online, so they've got the ability to go off and they've got their transit routes set up, and I can then obviously work with them to do all the administration that sits behind the scenes. From a database perspective, all the tracking the impact squares are in the national data set, so I guess I see exactly what regional organisers would see, but they're all the squares are hidden away from the national data analysis. So most squares will have some kind of a TTI or some kind of code that separates them from the national scheme. So we're not biasing the national data set, but we're stored and essentially our volunteers, to all intents and purposes, feel like they're carrying out the national surveys. They see the same kind of online input as I do as a regional. So very simple, very straightforward, very easy for me to take advantage of the national scheme infrastructure, if you like, that's in place. And to date, we across the 3 schemes, so the take up was, so we're starting from a nearly standing start. So when we had where we have squares that are part of the national recording scheme, so they're nationally part of wider countryside butterfly survey or NPMS, we've incorporated that as part of our sample. And then I've recruited new volunteers to come in and pick up the rest. So I think we had 11 BBS squares, 3 or 4 NPMS squares, and likewise UKBMS. So they're part of our sample, and I've then recruited volunteers to plug to get us towards the 72 squares. I'll come on to why it says 78 on this slide in a sec. And after 5 years, well, this is 4 years now, I haven't updated it with this year's data, but we've had coverage from a bird perspective of, I think we're about 95% coverage now from birds and around about 85% for butterflies. And I think we're around about the 60% coverage for NPMS at the moment. And that's up to 2023 data. I know all the data is not quite in yet for 2024. So we've got off to a pretty decent start from a coverage perspective, which then begins to build our data set. And if you like stats, then we probably have topped 100 bird species now. And we're getting on for something like 60% of the UK most commonly recorded butterfly species, and NPMS works slightly differently, so those records aren't comparable. But essentially, we've got off to what we feel is a pretty decent start, some good coverage, and we're starting now with some volunteers. Next year, we'll be entering their 5th or maybe 6th year of coverage. So we're starting to build that picture and that depth of data to start to look at and to analyse. So in terms of outputs, and I'm very nervous to talk about the sciencey bit because I'm very much not a data analyst, as you'll probably get, but I'll make an attempt to try and look at some of the sciencey bits. But in terms of the outputs, we have an online interactive map that comes out every year. So these are some screenshots. So on the left-hand side, you can see our coverage for the breeding bird survey, and on the right-hand side for wider countryside butterfly survey. So all of these, there are 3 individual maps on our website, and I can send you the links through. And these are basically simply nothing more than a presentation back to volunteers and to anybody who wants to look as to what we found. So all the squares that are covered in blue is where we've had coverage. And if you clicked on a square, as you've got on the screenshot on the right, you get some simple information like a species list of every species recorded, how many species we've recorded in a square. And you can flip between years, you can look at an aggregation across the survey project. So that will be refreshed year on year on year on year on year as we go through the project. And it's a very kind of simple and easy way of volunteers having a bit of a play and have a look around to see what's out there and to see what's been found. Not really analysis, but presentation of data. We also are starting to build, and we need to think a bit more about this, but in terms of our nature recovery planning, we're starting to think much more around our work being targeted around species assemblages. So rather than single species nature recovery programs, we're starting to see if there's a way of actually looking at farmland birds or chalk grassland butterflies or chalk grassland kind of plant assemblages as ways of actually starting to look and inform at a slightly more granular level our work with our farmers on the ground. So work is not perfect on these yet, but every year we produce a series of maps looking at the distribution. I think we've identified 8 bird species. I think we've got something like 9 or 10 butterfly species and so on that we're starting to look at to see is there any correlation between, in this case, the distribution and abundance between yellowhammer and linnet and others as we go through. And I'm not quite sure where we go with that yet, but we have the ability to do that. And we have the ability to start to look, I guess, in depth to look at habitat preferences across different species and how that relates to our work with farmers on the ground and the impact of what they're trying to do. So we have the species assemblage work in place. Where it gets really exciting, and I caveat the next little section of the slides with actually at the moment we have 5 years of data. Really, I'd like to be talking about this in 5 years' time when we have getting on for 10, 15 years worth of data to start to look at longer term data sets so we can start to look at what we might call some trends. But with all those kind of caveats, we asked Gavin at BTO and Colin, I think you're on the call as well, and Mark at UKCH to look at our butterfly data. It's almost to say that if we were to run the stats now, run the analysis exactly as would do the national data set, so we run exactly the same tests and come up with the same kind of graphs, what would kind of trend graphs begin to look like for birds and for butterflies? So these graphs haven't been updated with 2024 data yet, so there'll be another year's data to add on hopefully soon. But it starts to kind of show, I guess, some of the beginnings, and particularly for our volunteers and for farmers when they want to look at what the outputs this might be, what some of these trend graphs might be. And as you can see, there's a massive gap in confidence levels, which is borne out of the fact that it's only 4 years data. But you can start to see, and volunteers can start to see some of the trends that are starting to come out from a bird perspective. And likewise, from a butterfly perspective, I guess the noise in this one is probably even more exaggerated in the birds, given the seasonal fluctuations and the sensitivities to different springs and summer conditions than birds. But you can see here, so small blue and meadow brown, the red line is the data, the tracking the impact data, and that smooth, the slightly browner line is that with a smoothed kind of line, and then the darker lines are from I think we put a 50-kilometre buffer around, so we're trying to compare Chilterns Day to a regional average. And you can see for both so far with a few variances, the shape of the graph is kind of following the regional average. But again, this is caveated with all kinds of health warnings around the volume of data we have. But it just starts to kind of show the analysis that we're trying to be able to put together. And I guess more importantly, how we can compare that with regional trends. Does the Chilterns buck the trend positively or negatively to national or regional graphs? And start to work that through. So that was an exercise also in us beginning to get a head around the stats and starting to get a head around the analysis and what does it really mean, so we're better prepped when we have that bigger data set coming through. So hopefully you can start to see where we're heading from coverage, how we've built, how we've worked through to get to the analysis stage. One thing I did want to share though at this level here, just for a bit, and this is kind of breaking news almost in a way, that for yellowhammer we've done a bit more in-depth digging on things. So we started to do, and we've done a lot of work, and so this is that link back, and I guess that constant practical link back that I'm quite keen to kind of make sure all our work links back in with our farmers. We've done lots of work on farmland birds over the last 5 years. It's been a key focus for the farmer cluster work. So we've put out around about 60 tonnes of winter food. Farmers are planting around about 60, 70 hectares, I think, of new winter birdseed margins and all kinds of other habitats suitable for our kind of farmer birds. We've done lots of hedgerow copsing and planting. So lots of work that you would think would favour, particularly yellowhammer. And when we start to look at the graph that Governor BTO produced for us last year, you can start to see, albeit over 4 years, there is a kind of a gradual kind of uptick in terms of the population in our project area for yellowhammer, set against the graph on the right, which is the national and regional trend for yellowhammer, which is showing long-term decline, levelling off, and then maybe dipping off again in the southeast over the last few years. So we started to think, well, is that just noise or is there something happening there? And then we started to look at some ringing data. So we've got a ringing project, local ringing group are doing some work along some farm feeding sites, and lots of stuff on these graphs. But if you just focus on the left-hand side, the ringers there, so the yellowhammer figures on the left-hand side of the graph, that actually is talking about the number of young birds in their catch every year, that you can see over the years has gradually been increasing. year on year, essentially more young birds in the population, an indication that better breeding success. So we tested this a bit with Gavin and BTO and others, and we're pretty confident that this is actually showing signs of an increase in the yellowhammer population on the ground. Caveated, as I say, with everything, that this is it's only 5 years of data and so on, but as I guess as an example of the kinds of local trends, the local impact that we can start to bring out from tracking the impact and other schemes that may be working across the country. When we have a big enough data set, we link it back to practical work on the ground. We can now get back to our farmers and say, with a degree of confidence, that actually all your efforts, guys, are making a difference. We can see discernible interest and change in the yellowhammer population, which has been one of their focus areas, only possible because of huge amounts of volunteer effort through BBS and bringing data to kind of correlate the two, to give them that further motivation to go on and do more, and to give them that kind of overall pat on the back. So we're being careful with the words we use yet at the moment, but we're quite confident that we can actually show that there has been an uptick over the last 5 years in the yellowhammer population. And that brilliant example of farmers and volunteers working together, landscape scale. If we just relied on the national trends, we'd probably assume that actually the population was gradually declining in our patch, but actually it just shows how we can have a bit of information. We've got that kind of analysis to prove otherwise. So anyway, more on that to come, hopefully, as we go through. So a little bit there for me, I guess, on the background to the project, but hand over now to Enya to talk through this point I made earlier about co-location and the ability to look at differences between birds and plants and butterflies, and how we might be able to use the data to tell an even richer story. So Enya, are you now in control? If I hand over to you.
Should be.
Cool.
Yeah, thank
you.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody. So I'm just going to talk for about 5-10 minutes or so about some of the analysis that JNCC has been doing. And so this slide just kind of gives you a bit of an overview as to kind of where we were kind of coming from and why we decided to go down the route that we have done for the analysis. So we had found that 55 squares were visited by more than one survey in 1 year or more. I haven't got it in here, but I think that number reduces as you kind of look for a number of years of data. So I think it's like 34 squares were visited by more than one survey in 2 years or more, 24 squares were visited by more than one survey in 3 years or more, and 12 squares were visited by more than one survey in all 4 years. So because of that, we were interested in kind of looking at all of our data together. So pooling all of the data and kind of looking at some mean abundances of species and kind of spatial distributions of the species. What we did find was really interesting, though, is that so we have 19 farmland birds in our farmland bird indicator for the UK. 18 of those were found within the TTI area. Similarly, for the woodland bird indicator, 28 of the 37 species were found in the TTI area. 8 of our 26 specialist butterfly indicator species were in TTI. And along with these, we've got 23 priority listed species, of which there's birds, butterflies and plants were again in the TTI, and then 36 species which were threatened as were classified as near threatened, vulnerable, endangered or critical were also found in TTI. So this area is clearly a very, very important habitat landscape for these very important indicators of our various habitats. So we wanted to focus on these species groups in particular for our analysis and look at their kind of mean abundances and spatial distributions, and in some cases compare those mean abundances to their equivalents at the national level using national level data. So this first map shows you the spatial distribution of the farmland bird indicator species. Species in this indicator are classified as generalist or specialist based on their reliance on farmland habitat. And so here we looked at the total species richness over time per site. So how many unique farmland generalist species or specialists were found in each of the sites. And you can see that there are kind of some patches within the area where there are higher species richness and lower species richness. So this can potentially kind of over time, this could give us a more accurate picture of what species are where in order to target management and actions to support certain species or species groups. So this type of data could allow you to make more targeted decisions. Similarly, with the woodland bird indicator, we can use this local scale data to look at distributions of specific species or groups of important species. And again, here you can see there are patches within the specialist community where potentially there's a higher number of specialist woodland bird indicators than others, and potentially this is an indication that these sites are important for these groups of species. What we've also looked at is the so our butterfly indicators. I've just showed you the specialist one here, but we have looked at the wider countryside on farmland and woodland butterfly indicator species as well. And so this graph on the left shows you the mean abundance per site for each of the 8 specialist butterfly indicator species, which are in the TTI area. So you've got chalk-gill blue, Adonis blue, etc. And then the number in brackets beside them is the number of records that mean abundance is based on. So the number of times a surveyor has gone out to count butterfly and they've counted, at least one chalk-gill blue in the area. So this is based on four surveys, 4 records. So for some species, kind of further down the list, even though there are some very high or very low records of them based on the number in the brackets, the standard error around their abundances, their mean abundance, is quite low. And this suggests that the abundances are relatively even over time and across sites. However, other species, like your chalk-gill blue and Adonis blue, which are important species within the Chilterns area due to their reliance on chalk grassland, have greater variation in their abundances across the sites, which suggests that some sites are more important to them than others, which is suggested by the graph on the right, where you can see the darker colours are lower mean abundances for that site, and the lighter colours are higher mean abundances. So this type of data could show how important habitat is for species, and we can use this data to target management of locally important species. One thing to note with this graph on the right is that the very high mean abundances in the 2 sites, the one for each site, for each species, excuse me, are potentially skewed by the fact that surveys were carried out in them in months where the species are especially active. So in August, these 2 species are very active, and so the surveys that were carried out for these 2 species, for each one, a survey was carried out in August, and so this can cause kind of these high mean abundances. Especially when the total number of records is very low, as we see on the graph on the left. This can skew the results potentially. So it's really important that in order for us to create an accurate picture of how species are doing at individual sites, we need sites to be surveyed consistently each month or at the same time each year to give us greater confidence in our results. But these graphs can potentially show something really important that's worth looking into even more. Something we've also looked at is the plant monitoring, so the NPMS plant portal data. And we explore the abundances of species which are included in the plant indicators for arable field margins, broadleaf woodlands and hedges, and lowland grassland. I've got 2 of them here to show you. So similar to the previous graph, we have the indicator species down the left-hand side with the number of records of that species over time in the brackets. So 17 accounts, for example, of black medic being found within the TTI area. But what's different in this graph is how the bars are filled for each species. So for those not familiar with the NPMS scheme, the scheme asks surveyors to classify plant abundances within categories during the survey rather than absolute numbers. So in this graph, each species, we've looked at how many times the species has been classified as having an abundance of 1 to 2 individuals, which is the yellow, several individuals, which is green, 1 to 4%, 5 to 10%, 11 to 25%. It goes all the way up to 100, but for this for the species in this indicator, they were only up as far as 25%. So we can use this data to determine how widely distributed a species is, and we can identify rare species and see how prominent they are. And as you get more data, you can also produce longer trends over time, as Nick was talking about earlier. And for the plants, we can see how plant species change over time with changes in the environment due to human activity or climate change or pollution. Any of the issues that biodiversity is facing, with more data, especially at the local level, we get more of an idea of what's happening at that local level. So this type of localization of the national schemes has the potential to give you a more nuanced and regionally specific picture, while remaining comparable and complementary to that national scheme data. And this is just the other, I didn't want to show you these two graphs in once because it's quite a lot to take in, but just to give you an idea of what the other indicator species are showing. Obviously a lot more species in the broadleaf woodland and hedges indicator. An idea of how, and it gives you an idea of how prominent each species is and how widely distributed. Finally, something that we have begun to explore is the comparison between species mean abundances at the TTI level versus at the national level. So here we are showing the mean abundance per site at the national level in red and the mean abundance per site with standard error for TTI in blue. Again, the number of records at the TTI level is shown in the brackets. This type of analysis shows you that you find a different result for species abundances when taking the local perspective, where some species show higher abundances per site than what you would expect based on the national level figures. And some, on the other end of the scale, some show lower abundances than expected. All of this information may be an indication that there is further investigation needed at the local level. So these national level numbers have a lot of different contexts wrapped up in them. So this type of analysis should therefore be taken further and explore, and you could explore abundances for protected sites only at a national level compared to the TTI area, or compare abundances for squares of the same habitat type at the national level versus habitat that the same habitat at the TTI level, to give you more of a picture of what's going on and to really kind of hone in on kind of what's happening at the TTI versus at the national level. So more years of data collection and more volunteers taking up squares will allow for questions such as these to be explored. Finally, we also compared abundances for plants between the TTI area and national areas. And this graph shows the number of national level records for each species along with their red list category, so near threatened or vulnerable, along with their red list category compared to the number of TTI records for that species. Again, in the brackets, you've got the number of records of that species for the TTI area only. Interestingly, when I was doing this analysis, I found that the TTI area actually had more data for red listed plant species than the national level. So I found that 5 species were classified as near threatened, vulnerable, endangered or critical in TTI, but data was only available for 4 of these at the national level within the time frame in order for me to produce this result. So this shows that all of the effort that goes into the TTI project is paying off, and it's producing this wealth of information at a local level, which wouldn't have been available for them at the national level. We will be carrying out this comparison with the national data for the butterflies, but I'm just waiting on kind of approval of getting that national level data. But that is everything from me. So I'm now going to, Nick, give you back control whenever you want to click the button.
All right, thanks, Enya. I guess everything's caveated with 5 years' time, but hopefully that's an example of, I guess, the difference and what you can do with the graphs that we've had produced for us so far, or your work, Enya, there in terms of what can come out and that difference that makes to us as a national landscape, with our responsibility essentially charged with nature recovery in our particular patch, the value of that local data on the ground versus, say, relying on the national schemes. So I want to move on now. So it's not all about data and stats. There is a very heavy data and stats, and I guess that's the kind of key focus wanting to do it. But for us also, none of this happens without, I'll come back to that bit, without people. So the other bit of tracking the impact in the twin, and it's really key, and I guess the key message we want to emphasize here, that we've wanted to, we've needed to, and I'm really pleased we've invested heavily in people. in training people, resourcing people. So a big part of my job is as a regional organisation would be with allocating squares and transit routes, that kind of thing. But also I see it as part of my role to support, to excite, to enthuse, to engage, to keep motivated existing volunteers, but equally more importantly, start to think 10 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, that where's the capacity, if you like, in the Citizen Science Network, in the Chilterns, of people that are suitably motivated or inspired and skilled to be able to pick up and to carry out this project as we continue to grow, as we have more demand on squares, and as we want to kind of grow that Citizen Science Network across the Chilterns. So we've invested heavily over the last 5 years in training people in terms of survey methodology. So we've put just under 100 people now, I think, have gone through either a breeding bird survey or wider countryside, but I say it every time, NPMS or WCBS or BBS surveys. Partly that we want to make sure that people obviously are getting that kind of support and that kind of training, but also really keen to make sure that the methodologies people adopt are robust and are consistent with national methodologies. So you can see a picture of Rachel Murphy from Plant Life, Nick Bowles from Upper Thames Butterfly Conservation, and Nick Ryan has run a training program for us every year since we started for volunteers wanting to pick up those surveys, so they get the training firsthand, if you like. They get the best possible training they can before they head off and pick up their survey squares. And we will keep carrying on doing that as much as people want to work it through. And we've also then thinking ahead to there are a lot of people in tracking the impact that are existing. They are either existing surveyors and want to do more. In brackets, it's quite hard to stop people wanting to do more, which is brilliant. And people always want to do more, which is great. But there are a lot of people out there who are probably quite keen and they're confident in their ID, but have never picked up a survey before that we've been on training. But there are all sort of people out there who just have come back to us and said, I really would like to get involved, but I'm just not confident in my species ID to be able to pick up a survey. And to which we've put on a program now over 5 years of about 200 people have come through species ID training courses in birds, butterflies and plants to give them that extra bit of confidence that either they needed, they were either skilled enough but didn't have the confidence, or actually they needed that kind of bridge a gap. So there may be 2, 3, 4 years time they're ready to pick up a survey. So a range of training programs. I think we have 6 sessions on our bird courses looking at different habitats. We have 4 sessions on our plants looking at the key flowering periods, and then 3 sessions for butterflies looking at the pre-emergence but the flight periods of the main species. We go to a range of different habitats, arable farmland habitats, woodland, we go to wet sites, we go to chalk grassland sites. So volunteers get a range of the different species that are typical on that patch. And then we have a whole online program as well that we've developed over time, where our lead tutors will deliver online sessions by the night before. So these are the kind of things you like to expect, that are there for people to kind of download and revisit and to look back. So I guess that was a kind of a COVID innovation for us, with that online and that in-field training program, to give volunteers that confidence to pick things up. And our evaluation, I'm probably running out of time now, so I won't go too much into this, but we can always improve, and we'll always seek to improve, but that's going down very well so far with our volunteers and giving them that extra bit of confidence. But I think on a local level, I guess the key message coming out, we have the ability to run those kind of training programs locally. We can do them face to face. But the broader point that's really coming out to me is around this community of volunteers attaching around a focus point. So the volunteers living within, people are volunteering for the local patch. It's where I live, it's where I walk, it's where I engage, it's where my kids go to school. There's a definite correlation coming out between people wanting to volunteer for tracking the impact on a local landscape level, not distinct from the national schemes, but I guess is complementary to the national schemes. We have a very active WhatsApp group. We've got 150, 60 volunteers now on that group that's pinging as we go. So people are kind of putting pictures and photos up and asking questions, and we have lots of experts on the other end answering questions and generating that real sense of local community and feel around the Chilterns and attachment to the work the farms are doing. So I think, again, there's a real key point from a landscape scale project around having that contact point. I have the time to make contact with local volunteers, where I guess on a national scale, that's going to be nigh on impossible just because of capacity and numbers. So a big part of that, investing in people, and we will continue to do that as we go through while there's still demand coming through. A couple of bits then before I wrap up. So we've come to the end of 5 years of lottery funding as we speak now. So to avoid that kind of boom busters, short-term projects always tend to do, we have secured funding from a local charity, a national charity, but they're based locally, called Rebel Restoration. who share the agenda of community engagement in local wildlife programs, conservation programs linked to citizen science. So they have committed to an 18-month contract with us with a view they would like to extend should things work out. So we're hoping that actually the product is very sellable, it's very saleable, and I'm hoping that the partnership with Rebel goes well, which means we can continue for at least one more survey season. And as I say, hope if we make it work, that can continue longer in. So we have the ability locally to find local funding schemes for these things, as well as kind of national schemes and to working through. And then I guess our bigger aspirations, we're only covering about a third of the Chilterns at the moment. So our longer term plan, with subject to funding through, is to scale this up across the whole of the Chilterns. So we get a Chiltern picture, not just a central Chilterns picture. So that's subject to all kinds of resources and other things. So that's very much in our frame of mind to be able to do that. For those of you some of you may have heard or otherwise, but there is an emerging project now across the national landscapes that have chalk as their base geology to look at how we might work together. And I think there are 10 national landscapes and other areas who are working to look at that, to have this kind of even bigger kind of landscape scale, and monitoring is a key theme coming out of that. So we're beginning to test whether there is merit in scaling up something like tracking the impact across a slightly wider area. So we look at that local feel, but we look at local consistency across a bigger area. And we've also done a piece of work with the local nature recovery strategy, looking at the feasibility of scaling tracking the impact up into a local nature recovery strategy concept, with the view of asking the question, well, how are Buckinghamshire in this case doing in terms of their species recovery as the LNRS begins to play out? So lots of irons in the fire, if you like, around how we might scale this up, both geographically within the Chilterns and out of the Chilterns and other areas, which opens up a whole different kind of can of worms of different conversations. But we feel somewhere there is a framework, much as we've scaled down the national schemes, to scale them back up to fit into other geographies. So anyway, much more to be done. We're only 5 years in. As I say, I'd love to still be talking to you in 10 years time, 15 years time, where we'll have much more robust data. We'll have the trend data in place, and we can really start to tell more of a picture and work things through. But 5 years in, hopefully that's been useful. I'm conscious, Ethan, of time. I was going to talk a little bit of our work with young people, but it's 1:45 now, and maybe that might be for another day, and maybe to open out to questions. But maybe, Ethan, if however you feel best use of our last 15 minutes, whether you want to open out to questions or we'll talk a little bit about our work with young people. But what's your suggestion? Still with us, Ethan?
Yes, yeah, I am.
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
Maybe if you can abridge the work with young people slightly, then we might squeeze in both, if that's possible.
Okay, I'll be very quick. So essentially, we took at the beginning of the project that most of our citizen scientists and conservation volunteers, brilliant as they are in our core markets, absolutely fantastic, probably starting to age a little, if I horribly paraphrase that. So essentially what we weren't doing was any really meaningful targeted engagement with young people. So cut a really long story short, we sat down with, I think, 8, maybe 9 of, at the time, there were BTO youth reps, some of the RSPB guys now, some of the other kind of the youth rep network. It's been fantastic to see that emerge over the last 4 or 5 years as well, to kind of get a bit of a view as to what will it take to particularly engage the 14 to 18-year-old demographic. So young people who've got an interest in conservation, an interest in the outdoors, but not sure where to go next. There's not really a group of like-minded people. Where do they go to get their next level of skill development, if you like? So in essence, New Shoots was born out of that conversation with young youth reps, with young people, that essentially said, as young people, we'd like a program, please, where in the summer we get to know the best of the wildlife in the Chilterns. So essentially we have a program every month where over the summer period we take the young people out, the group out to our best habitats and their best sites, and we run bird ID walks, butterfly ID walks, we do plant ID sessions, we get in and do some river fly work, we do some river invertebrate work, and at every session we're introducing citizen science and survey methodology into that. So we'll run a demo breeding bird survey, or a demo plant monitoring scheme survey, or a demo river fly into those sessions, so young people get that kind of basis of ID skills and survey skills. All the sessions are run by local experts, so county bird recorders or the chair of the Butterfly Conservation Upper Thames region, or local experts who can really impart their knowledge, and people get it then and give them that real kind of expert view. We take them to a range of different habitats, but also each session is run by a different partner. So National Trust will run a session, a local wildlife trust will run a session, the Chilterns Society will run a session, others. So the young people get to see different organisations. They start to see all the different opportunities that are out there, if you like, across the conservation network. And then in the winter, essentially, we come back to the same sites, or plus or minus the same sites, and the young people get stuck in with some habitat work. So whether that's scrub bashing on chalk grassland, whether it's dead hedging on the edge of a woodland, whether it's hedgerow planting, whether we're looking at in-channel berms in chalk streams, they get to then have a go. So they complete that cycle essentially of conservation practice in the winter and surveying in the summer. We have bird ringing demos. The RSPB take us for a behind-the-scenes tour at Otmore. So over the year, young people get a whole range of exposure to different sites, different species, different conservation techniques, and different partners, with the view that that will then either kick them onto either more volunteering opportunities, or if they're educationally minded, kick them onto a university course. We're starting to see now some of the young people coming through where they're picking up their first traineeships with a local wildlife trust, or just getting accepted with their first kind of jobs coming through. So it's essentially a year-long project to give young people an exposure and interest and an introduction to wider conservation. But probably enough for me, Fisa, on that. I'll probably paraphrase that in 2 minutes, but I'm happy to share more if people are interested in that work with young people. Oh, and one or two have then gone on to pick up tracking the impact. So a couple of guys are now picking up butterfly squares. Someone's now picking up a breeding bird survey square, and that's if people want to. So introduction to a whole range of different conservation tasks and opportunities. And I'll probably call it to a halt there and open up for questions if there are any.
Great, thank you, Nick, and to Ethan and Enya as well. Just a notice to everyone, Ethan's just posted a feedback form in the chat as well, if people could fill that out for the TEPoP Festival. And yeah, I'll go to the Slido for questions. So the first question I've got is, what informed your choice of indicator species?
Very good question.
Sorry, Nick.
Sorry, Catherine.
Ethan, sorry, do you want to jump in?
Sorry, just while you're doing the Q&A, I think some people aren't able to access the chat. So would you mind if I just shared a slide with some of the links on it as well, so they can either put questions in or do the feedback, or sign up for some of the events?
Yeah, no worries.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. So if the question was what led us to looking at essentially why cover birds, butterflies and plants are not bats or earthworms or whatever in different areas. So essentially it was about it. I'm horribly paraphrasing, quite a long conversation, but we wanted to get a balance between taxa that we felt gave us a good proxy for the nature of the Chilterns landscape. So we are largely a farmed landscape, quite heavily wooded, but largely a farmed landscape. In our particular patch, we don't have a huge amount of water. Most of the chalk streams are in different areas. So essentially, we brought it down to actually, well, if our grassland if our plants in our arable landscape and on our grassland landscape are going in a certain way, obviously key to that with the chalk area butterflies, particularly with the sensitivity in the Chilterns or the prevalence in the Chilterns of a number of real key specialist species, as well as generalists, and essentially our farmland birds and woodland birds coming across the piece. We felt that gave us a good proxy for changing the landscape, balanced with also a project of this scale. So we've got 72 squares, 3 opportunities. There's 210 opportunities out there to survey. We wanted to make sure that actually we had capacity to get the coverage. So we probably could, and there's a very strong argument to pick out bats or to pick out, I'll say earthworms flippantly, but you get where I'm coming at. The challenge then was, or we could look at sawflies, or we could look at all kind. Would we have enough people out there with the skills to get the coverage to give us that data on the back? So in essence, the answer to the question here is it was a merger of both of those. We're not pretending for a minute that birds, butterflies and plants are everything, but that gave us the proxy to then say, well, if actually birds and plants and butterflies are going the right way, then that's probably telling us something about the health of the landscape, or vice versa. Lots of opportunities and conversations with spin-offs around bats, and we're talking to one or two other organisations about how we might do some stuff with reptiles and other things, but the main core of the programme was born out of that kind of proxy and capacity, in essence.
Perfect, thank you. So next question I've got is, someone said, excellent work. And then, do you monitor soil health and have time series data for the area? It would be interesting to know the trends and patterns on soil health, I assume.
Yeah, good question. So soil health is not part of the core Tracking the Impact project, but with our farmer cluster, we are starting to really get in depth in terms of soil health. So there are 18 farms in our cluster group, and each of those farms has been through, and we've funded each of those farms to go through a full farm carbon baseline work with Farm Carbon Toolkit, which does include soil carbon, it includes worm counts, and we've replicated that across 4 other cluster groups in the Chilterns as well. So in essence, 80 farmers in the 5 cluster groups across the Chilterns now have that baseline in place. And we're working on various programs, some funded externally by Rothschild Foundation and others, where we're looking now at supporting farmers to better understand what that baseline means and to put in place practical questions, whether it's through cover cropping, whether it's through moving towards direct drilling. And we've actually got a program set up with Kieran Brown from the National Earthworm Recorder looking, and we're going to do on 6 farms, we're going to do some systematic earthworm surveys with those 6 farms to start to build and start to help the farmers understand and get some baselines as to some of the soil health indicators. So we're not as far down the line as we are with Tracking the Impact in terms of ongoing monitoring. This is very much a kind of, I guess, an education and awareness and a baselining exercise with our farmers. So yes, we're in that space, but Tracking the Impact is not through the medium of Tracking the Impact, if that answers the question.
Yeah, answers it perfectly. Thank you. So next question I've got is, are management actions being recorded? And if so, how or where?
Good question. So we are literally 2 weeks away from publishing a case study booklet, both for Tracking the Impact and for the farmer cluster work, to shout about, I guess, and try and make this a little bit more real for people and to work things through. So we've completed an exercise over 5 years of tracking exactly the impact on the ground, or the practical habitat work on the ground. So in short, we've supported 20 new agri-environment schemes. So for each of those, we have all those schemes in place. We've done a big kind of spreadsheet analysis of all the different options and the hectareage and the sizes of those. I haven't got the exact figures to hand, but we've got the exact hectareage. If when you aggregate it across of new wildflower margins, new rough grass margins, species-rich grassland management, all the range of different SFI and agri-environment scheme options that the farmers are putting in place, we've got those aggregated up, so we can say across the cluster, and I'm making up a figure now, but it's probably not far off this, we're working on 500, 600 hectares of grassland improvement schemes. I think it's about 113 kilometres of hedgerow across the cluster are in management schemes going forward, as well as some of the direct delivery things. So in time, we'll be able to then, I guess, correlate, and maybe it could be even more clever, and it's beyond me in terms of the stats, but we'll start to correlate trend analysis with the volume of activity and type of activity through agri-environment schemes, as well as some of the projects we've been able to deliver through direct grant schemes as well. So short answer to your question is, yes, we do track them. We have those figures in place. They're not all been delivered yet because the schemes are only just, some of them are only just becoming live as we speak. So we're still quite early, but that's a key part of the whole work, is to correlate in landscape scale monitoring and landscape scale conservation.
Perfect, thank you. Cool, I'm going to try lump 2 questions together in the interest of time. So we've got, where or how do you advertise the youth engagement workshops and opportunities? And then, are there ways you can encourage young people from different backgrounds, such as getting in contact with local schools?
Yeah, very good question. So I think this is, so for all of the the New Shoots program has been one of the things that have really, I guess, excited us to be one of those kind of areas that you look back and you're really proud on doing. But it has also been our Achilles heel, that as an organisation, the Chilterns Conservation Board, our route to market, if you like, our reach into non-traditional communities is pretty limited. So the short answer to the question is, we advertise New Shoots through all of our usual avenues that you'd expect. Our partners do likewise, but pretty much if you looked at all our wildlife trusts and national trust, our reach tends to get you to white middle class families. What we're struggling to get to is actually really trying to break through the urban communities of, say, High Wycombe or Aylesbury, which are there. So that's something we're working harder on, and we need to do more on our route to market. So at the moment, the New Shoots kind of audience probably isn't as diverse as maybe we would like it to be on that front, and that's probably not down to necessarily the product, but more just to our route to market. So things we're trying to work more on. Although interestingly, without really kind of targeting it has started over the 5 years. We've seen a bigger, greater number of people coming from a neurodiverse community every year. So I think word's kind of getting out around there, whether it's kind of the grapevines of spreading, or actually that's the nature of the network, or it's the nature of conservation that we do tend to attract a more neurodiverse. So there's a bit of a waffly answer to your question there, really, but it's not, we're not as good, or we're nowhere near as kind of, we have that depth of reach, I guess, into the communities we'd like to have, and that's something we need to work harder on and will do over the next few years.
Perfect, thank you so much. Cool. So next question I've got is, have you found a demand for the co-located aspect of the data from any of your stakeholders, e.g. the farmers or funding organisations?
Good question. When we set the project up, and again, I'm not a data ecologist, you've worked that out by now at all. So a lot of the conversations when we sat down with the steering group at the time was, wouldn't it be great if we could do some co-located analysis? And I kind of took that as read and saying, you know what you're talking about. I don't really, but yes, it makes sense on that kind of front. So that's why, part of the reason why we set it up, to allow the kind of analysis that Enya shared with you, and we can work through. Do our funders demand it? At the moment, the lottery don't, but I think as we move more into things like landscape recovery, and some of the more DEFRA funded landscape schemes coming through, and hopefully if we apply and are successful, and I think we'll be getting more into some much more detailed, nuanced work when we will be able to. So I think it will become, funders might not demand it, but I think it will be a key strength for us to be able to present that and to be able to look at the impacts of that. So it's a real strength. I'm not sure any of our farmers would use the phrase co-located data analysis ever in a conversation with me, but being able to talk about birds, butterflies and plants and wildlife that call their farms home, and therefore the habitats that the wildlife is located in, where are we finding our butterflies? Oh, funny enough, we're finding it on the nicer grassland, or bird populations are stronger over in that corner of the farm when the hedges are more mature, or from that kind of conversation, it's invaluable. Partly to help them, inspire them to look at different agri-environment options, partly to give them a massive pat on the back when it works. And the Yellowhammer story we're obviously going to go big on, because that's, I guess, largely attributable to a lot of the efforts that they've worked on the ground. So we'll never use that phrase, but I think actually the appetite for more of this from a farmer perspective is huge. We just probably don't call it quite that. But on the front, but I guess in 10 years' time, when we've matured more and we're starting to look at the impact of our nature recovery program across the Chilterns, and we can start to look at, and we understand more about the work that you're doing, Enya, and some of the bigger trend stuff, then suddenly it will start to become a bit more real. At the moment, it's almost like, look at what the graph might look like in a few years' time, as opposed to the reality of it. But definitely for farmers, they absolutely love it. They get very excited when we start to talk about what's actually out there and the difference they're making on the ground.
Perfect, thank you. We've just come up to 2 o'clock now. We've still got 5 questions, so we can either go over or people can pop you an email. It would be, up to you.
I'm fine to carry on from the 10 minutes or so if people want to.
Yeah. Perfect.
I can do a combination of both if you like, but yeah.
Cool. So next question I've got is, someone said, a great scheme. Sorry, I've got a fly buzzing around my head. A great scheme. How many of your volunteers are repeat volunteers participating for more than 1 year following initial engagement and training?
Good question. So I think there's probably 2 answers to that. So how many of our volunteers are existing volunteers who have volunteered for other organisations that are essentially transferring across? And I probably count myself as one of those. I do bird surveys for 5 different organisations, so there's quite a and I've got the stats, I haven't got them to hand, but there's quite a high percentage of people who say, actually, I currently volunteer for my wildlife trust and I fancy having a go in tracking the impact, or I'm a current bird surveyor and I'd like to have a go at butterflies, or vice versa. There's quite a bit of movement around, if you like, on that kind of front. To the second part of the question about, I guess the question's getting at what's the attrition rate, how many people are dropping off. Very few, actually, so far. So you talked a bit, Enya, about the retention rates and how many people are coming through. There are a few people won't actually move away, or actually they find out that this is not for them. But it's probably less than 10%, I would say, so far. We have got some stats and evaluation I should have brought with me, but not a huge amount at the moment. Now, admittedly, that's maybe 2 or 3 years in. There might be a tipping point, 5, 6 years, when people just become a little bit disenfranchised. But I think the fact that it's from the narrative that's coming back from our evaluation, the fact that it's a local scheme, the fact it's on their doorstep, the fact we've invested heavily in people, we have a lot of the kind of community feel, we have various kind of workshops and events and the WhatsApp group. I think people feel kind of attached to that community, that kind of group feel, as opposed to I do my survey, never speak to Nick again for 9 months, and then he talks to me again in April. It's a pretty much ongoing conversation. We have various other events and opportunities that, so PTS, we're looking for volunteers to do some trials, some of their hedgehog work, and guys at UKCH looking at trialing some new AI for moths. So there's lots of other opportunities when volunteers can get involved in different things. And I think that's the beauty of a landscape scale project. You can keep in touch with people. You can form that kind of community of people. So, and I'd like to think that's probably part of the reason why we're maybe not seeing a big drop-off rate, because people feel engaged and there's always something new. That might tail off in 2 or 3 years' time, and we'll keep on top of that, and hopefully it won't happen, but we'll keep on top of it if it does.
Great, thank you. What I'll do is I'll just ask one more question because it's been upvoted a bit, and then the other ones people can email you if they're still interested. So last question we've got, what did the 5-year project cost? So how much HLF or match funding was received?
Good question. So the overall landscape partnership scheme, I guess, is not really where you're coming at, because that's massive and that covers a whole range of different projects. So tracking the impact, the 2 areas of cost for tracking the impact are my time and I hate using the word manage because I don't feel like I manage volunteers. I'd like to think that I kind of inspire and support. Anyway, that's a semantic. So my time, that probably equates over a year to probably somewhere a 0.4 equivalent. It peaks and troughs in obviously the busy period pre-spring, and during the spring it peaks and then falls down a bit out of season. So I'm probably around about a 0.4 full-time equivalent on my £500,000 a year conservation salary, but do the sums there. So that's probably something around about the level from a capacity perspective. And then our training budget is somewhere in the region of around about 15k a year with everything else that comes in. So it's not a massively expensive project in cash terms, but I guess if you put capacity and time into that as well as cash, we're probably in that kind of region. Interestingly, when we started off the project with 50 squares, we then had a sister project in the river catchment next in the Chess Valley who wanted to carry it out as well. So we essentially expanded from 50 to 72. The economy of scale, that didn't really cost us any more. So I could still cope with that amount of squares and volunteers. Didn't really need more capacity for my time. And we didn't need to expand the training program out there because there's enough capacity to cope with the demand. So I guess there's somewhere in there around about a tipping point between when actually the volume of squares or volunteers means you need an extra 0.1, 0.2 a day a week of someone's time, or when you need to run another set of training courses. But at the moment, 72 squares and the training program we have pretty much is covered within that kind of budget, if that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Cool, we'll wrap it there for the day. Thank you so much for your time and for speaking to us. That was super interesting. Yeah, people still online on the chat. There's the link to the feedback form and also more information on other dates in the TEPoP Festival.
Yeah, and just Catherine, just finish. Sorry, all the tracking there is. I'm not sure if we sent it out, but Ethan, maybe or through you, Catherine, we can put it out. There's the link to our website where the online maps I spoke about are on there. Some of the species assemblage graphs are on there, and a bit more information about our sign-up process and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to find out more, are you okay, Ethan or Catherine, to send the link round to our website to people? Yeah. And I'm happy to pick up questions if there are any others that weren't answered, if you want to email them through, or I can make sure that I answer them and get them back out.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the invite. Yeah. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, Nick. Bye.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Cheers.
Bye.